The latest Lonely Planet Online guide says, at the time of writing, Syria was one of the most dangerous places on the planet. To put it simply, you can't go. And if you can, you shouldn't. Well, we could and we did. It's day 2 for the SNI team of Amitabh Revi and Pratik Suri in Damascus. Though the temperature was in the welcome 20s as we ventured out in one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, circa 8 to 10,000 BC. We were determined to use the opportunity we had through a visa granted by the government and the tourism ministry's hospitality to the hilt. Aptly enough, it was the Damascus sword we saw first. It's a symbol of the city's power and resistance and was built in the 1960s in the Umayyad Square, a reference to the 7th century caliphate. Damascus blades were legendary from the 3rd to the 17th centuries, forged with steel from India. Asadi, our guide with 30 years of experience, told us a story of the first Sultan of Egypt and Syria, Salahuddin, displaying the might of the sword during the Crusades. He tossed a silk scarf in the air and let it fall and slide off the blade, cutting it clean into two. Made in the 1960s, the Damascene sword monument stood at the entrance to the old trade fair grounds and was initially made of a set of flags that changed every year to represent the countries participating. In 1988, it was changed to decorative stained glass that blends the Damascus rose with fire in an abstract design. It looks even more spectacular at night. Also spectacular are the Syrian government promotional videos captured by drone cameras. The regime launched a tourism, trade and investment drive in 2017, which has been ramped up this year. Beaches, plush hotels, sun and sea in Syria are always beautiful, and Syrian summer destination video campaigns are designed to show how far the war is from some government-controlled areas. Damascus, where we were, was one such area, but was declared fully government-controlled for the first time in May 2018, nearly 7 years after the civil war began in 2011. The United Nations counts more than 5.6 million Syrian refugees and 6.1 million internally displaced since the war began. The last UN estimate in 2016 puts the number of dead at 400,000, that too based on 2014 numbers. Anti-regime organizations set the number at more than 500,000. In 2017, the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura put the cost of rebuilding and reconstruction at more than $250 billion. It's no wonder then that there is a push for tourism, which was one of Syria's main sources of income until the conflict began. According to the World Trade Organization, Syria hosted more than 8.5 million tourists in 2010. We were among the few at the Damascus National Museum that has exhibits from the Paleolithic Stone Age to contemporary art. Though closed for renovation, the displays in the gardens are testament to the region's ancient history. After the discovery of the 8th century Umayyad Palace of Qasr al-Hayr al-Gharbi in the desert near Palmyra in 1936, the front facade was transported, restored and reconstructed as the main entrance. While the local girls took selfies, Asadi, a guide for over 30 years who's been unemployed since the conflict began 7 years ago, finds his memories flooding back in time.
Discovered mosaic painting, not mosaic stones, mosaic painting in the world, in one of the caves.
Although we missed the world's first alphabet display from Ugarit, which is inside the museum, there were exhibits of doors and ornaments from ancient Syrian temples, column bases, Roman-era mosaics and funerary reliefs, and a Hittite lion statue circa 1460 to 1190 BC. Almost as fascinating, the antiques were not fenced off, but lying around as if still part of the living present. The pride of place though, the restored 2000-year-old Lion of Al-Lat statue, a symbol of the ancient Roman city of Palmyra. It stood at the entrance to the temple with a lion holding a deer in a protective hug, one eye open to indicate it's always awake to help the weak. It's now also a symbol of the resistance against the so-called Islamic State terror group's cultural terrorism. The 15-ton, 11-foot-high statue was damaged by Daesh in 2015 during its first spell of control of Palmyra. It was moved to Damascus for restoration when Syrian and Russian troops briefly took control of the city in March 2016. Showing us a glimpse of what we would see next in Damascus, the Umayyad Mosque, Asadi also took us on a tour of what makes Syria, a country at the crossroads of Europe, Asia and Africa, so proud of thousands of sites of archaeological interest, from Roman relics to the Ottoman Empire. Across a busy street next to the National Museum is the Tekiye or Sultan Selim Mosque complex. It's described as one of the finest examples of Ottoman architecture in Damascus. The mosque, built of stone, marble and mosaic, has 2 minarets and walls with alternating light and dark stripes. It's closed because it's dangerously falling down. Our guide Asadi delves into history to tell us Selim II had it built by expanding his father's complex.
Can carry weight.
Suleiman I, known as Suleiman the Magnificent, was the 10th and longest reigning sultan of the Ottoman Empire from 1520 until his death in 1566. He ruled over 15 to 25 million people. Asadi almost echoes the words of Diane Dark in her book Syria.
But if we keep those things...
One of the most attractive spots in Damascus, the complex looks as if it's been lifted out of Istanbul with its typically Ottomanate silhouette. In a sense, it has. Masterminded in 1553 by Turkey's most famous architect Sinan, also referred to as the Ottoman Michelangelo. Built on the site of the Sultan of Egypt, Bayber's Ablaq Palace, which the Chagatai Turk Tamerlane had razed to the ground over a century earlier, its purpose was to provide a gathering point for pilgrims preparing for the annual Hajj to Makkah, an event which the Damascus governor traditionally took responsibility for. A walk through to an alleyway of handicraft shops, from ceramic to silver, from rugs to pottery, reminds us so much of India. And though there were Visa and MasterCard signs, there were no signs of tourists. An attached madrasa complex through a gateway led to a courtyard with more handicraft shops. The rooms once housed religious students. The mosque, still in use, was built in honor of Suleiman the Magnificent soon after the Ottoman conquest of Syria. We exited the complex and the shops to the street above, which is just near the tourism ministry, to continue our passage in the present through the past.
Anyway, we are taking...
A short drive away, past the Hejaz railway station, the former main terminus in Damascus, both present and past meet again at the Hamidiyeh souq. It's the largest market in the old walled city. Some restored ruins of the 1st century BC to the 4th century AD Roman temple of Jupiter and the western gate stand at its entrance. The 600-meter-long souq dates back to the Ottoman era to around 1780 during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid I. Built along the axis of the Roman route to the Temple of Jupiter, it's one of the most popular and frequented shopping areas, though there were a few international tourists. Asadi led us up an escalator to the entrance of the souq. As we moved through shades of light and darkness, as has been the norm in Syria, here too we were stopped by a military man who first checked the government letter that authorized us to shoot. Still not satisfied, he made a call to a ministry and only then allowed us to proceed. As shopkeepers' cries announcing their wares rang out, the atmosphere was quite lively and completely the opposite of the conflict in parts of Syria. A reminder of the war though, right above our heads, the corrugated iron roof peppered with bullets. But in the present, in what locals like to call the oldest mall in the world, it's about what people do in peaceful times. Shop for clothes, jewelry, food and spices, dry fruit and toys. Some sellers use the middle of the 15-meter wide pathway to peddle their wares, keeping a wary eye and scampering away as soon as they see signs of authorities coming in. Fresh bread rolls by, just making us more hungry as to what is to come. Exiting the souq, Asadi led us to the Great Mosque or Umayyad Mosque, said to be the oldest stone one, built between 705 and 715 AD by the Caliph Al-Walid I. It stands on a site that has been considered sacred for at least 3,000 years. The Arameans built a temple here in 1000 BC for Hadad, the god of storms and lightning. In the early 1st century AD, the Romans built a massive temple for Jupiter over the Aramean temple. Parts of the outer wall still survive. In the late 4th century, a church dedicated to John the Baptist was built in its place. And under the Umayyad Caliph Al-Walid, the church was demolished and the present mosque was built in its place between 706 and 715 AD. The work of thousands of craftsmen of Coptic, Persian, Indian and Byzantine origin, the Umayyad Mosque complex includes a prayer hall, a vast courtyard and hundreds of rooms for visiting pilgrims. The layout is based on the Mosque of the Prophet in Medina. The courtyard occupies nearly half of the site with a length of 122.5 and a width of 50 meters, surrounded by galleries of horseshoe arches. It contains 3 structures of polygonal form standing on columns and topped with domes. The oldest and most important of these is the treasury building, Bayt al-Mal, which was built by the Caliph al-Mahdi in 778 AD. The minaret in the southeastern corner is called the Minaret of Jesus because of a Muslim tradition that this is where Jesus or Isa will appear on the Day of Judgment. Inside what is considered one of the most holy mosques in the world, video journalist Pratik Suri was completely overawed.
Jesus Christ.
And even as we found the brilliance surrounding us hard to believe, we were actually not far from believers, both Muslim and Christian. In the mosque is the small chapel and shrine of John the Baptist, Prophet Yahya to Muslims, where tradition holds his head is buried. It is believed by some to possess magical powers and continues to be the focus of the Mandaeans' annual pilgrimage when they press their foreheads against the metal grill of the shrine and reportedly experience prophetic visions. The guillotine that was used to kill him, as the story goes, is also protected here. In 2001, Pope John Paul II is said to be the first pope to visit a mosque, primarily to see the relics of John the Baptist. The exquisite dome, chandeliers, rich engravings, and stained glass make for a hypnotic experience. The old and young, men and women pray here, some in traditional keffiyehs, some with reversed baseball caps, or even with their heads uncovered. There is a main mihrab and 3 others indicating the Qibla, the direction of the Kaaba in Makkah. A short walk through traditional markets with rosaries and trinkets led us to the Azm Palace, which dates back to the Ottoman Empire. It was built in 1749 and was the private home of Asad Pasha al-Azem, the governor of Damascus. After reconstruction, it now houses the Museum of Arts and Popular Traditions. The use of ablaq, alternating white limestone and black basalt, is a characteristic of historic Damascene masonry. The traditional house is an example close to perhaps India's Haveli tradition, built around a large courtyard with a green canopy. It has a harem, a private family wing, the salamlek, a guest wing, and the khadamlek, the housekeeping section and quarters. The hammams or baths comprise a succession of small rooms and narrow corridors leading to the main steam room. The guest wing has a main marbled floor reception hall and a number of rooms that display traditional crafts and the lifestyles of the time, including a hall of the bride. It has a hall dedicated to the Hajj pilgrimage with the traditional mehmal, the embroidered palanquin associated with the Hajj. It was normally covered in a silk cloth and embroidered in silver or gold with inscriptions from the Quran. In those days, a camel that successfully negotiated the deadly desert route would be retired to a comfortable life of non-burdensome tasks. We've been rewinding history in fast-forward mode in just a day in Damascus. Famished after our long trek through history, Asadi takes us on another walk down the old city lanes to a restaurant that has the city's fashionable crowd enjoying a meal, a cold beer, and shisha. The expressions priceless as families enjoy an early evening out. It's not just the grown-ups who are dressed up with somewhere to go in Damascus. 3-year-old Maroshka is busy like any other kid in any other part of the world on her mobile phone. Far from just stories of conflict, in just 24 hours we've seen Damascus clearly turn around the narrative normally associated with Syria. And there's lots more to that narrative as we continue our travel around the country in one of the world's cradles of civilization.